This is the Detroit Sports Podcast Network.
What's up, jerks?
Manning retired.
Which one?
Both.
I like kickers.
Put him on the board. Hausch Mazzoli. Got it. Championship.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Fantasy Nerds right here on the Detroit Sports Podcast Network, brought to you by the Fan Up Network. As always, I am Jason Jarvi. Follow me on Twitter at Jarvi the King. And this week I'm branching out. I'm away from the Laurel Park Studios with John the Doc Macaroon. I'm doing this from my house. I'm at the East Point Studios. And I'm here talking fantasy football right now. You may hear a dog bark in the background, but I'll try and edit that out, with our great editing budget that we get here on Detroit Sports Podcast Network. Fantasy football, I'll be here all year, but the biggest thing about it is that you got to have fun with it. And that's the best thing in every league. I know some people have really kind of got it down to it's just about the money, but true fantasy football players are in it because it's a league that they love, and it's people that they've been a part of, a league that they've been a part of for years. And I wanna throw it out to everybody. If you have a story of something crazy happening in your league or something funny that happened, I want you to tweet at. You can either tweet at me at Jarvi the King, or you can tweet the Detroit Sports Podcast Twitter page, because I want to share that with you, and I want to share my own experiences. And probably one of the best or one of the funniest things that ever happened in one of my leagues is, and it's always draft. Draft is always the most fun part of the year. It's essentially Christmas because we all get together, we have a live draft, and it's just a ton of fun. So I know one year it was first round. And the player up, he had the fifth pick, and he was taking his time, and we had a guy who had a timer because we set a timer, I think about 2 minutes per pick. So it got down, it kept going down, and then he had to go to the bathroom. So he went to the bathroom. When he came back, his time was essentially up, and the other guy was right there ready. And the little buzzer went off as he was peeling off the sticker. And our guy tackled him because he wanted the player so much. Of course, it was all for a show, but I think he did have a little bit of lasting knee injury. But draft is fun, and we'll talk more about drafts and different drafts that you can hold, whether it be live or online, later in these episodes. But right now, last week we talked about rookies, and I want to go a little bit more in depth. Because I think we covered what happened last year, and then we quickly went through what's going on with rookies this season. And I want to start with quarterbacks to get them out of the way. First overall pick, obviously Jared Goff going to the Rams. He's going to be an interesting player to watch. I'm not sure if he's going to be a starter, but the biggest thing against him is that he doesn't have a lot to throw to. His main receivers right now are Tavon Austin, Kenny Britt, Stedman Bailey, and Brian Quick. And also going against him is he's essentially just going to be a figurehead because they have one of the top running backs in the league in Todd Gurley. So it's just going to be a lot of handoff left to Todd Gurley, handoff right to Todd Gurley, throw a screen pass to Todd Gurley. But what you're going to see from Jared Goff and what we saw at Cal is he showed flashes. He definitely has a big arm, and that you would think that would help with Tavon Austin. Tavon Austin hasn't really turned into that number one receiver. He's still a slot guy. You can compare him to Deshaun Jackson. He just hasn't gotten to that level yet. So I think what we'll see this year from Jared Goff is he's going to have flashes of greatness. You're going to see a game here or there where he throws over 300 yards, he gets 3 or 4 touchdowns, but he's likely going to be throwing a lot of picks, and as I said, he's going to be handing the ball off to Todd Gurley a lot. The only way that I really see him excelling in year one is if one of those wide receivers or if one of the rookie wide receivers that they picked up turns into a legitimate top-tier wide receiver. Kenny Britt has shown flashes, and definitely when he was in Tennessee, he had that mold of possibly being a really, really good wide receiver. As I said, Tavon Austin, he has they both have the potential. They both have big speed. It's just, are they going to be able to get out there, get separation? They really have kind of neutered Tavon Austin up to this point. They throw it's bubble screens, it's end arounds. He could become more, but I'm just not. I don't see that right now. I think they probably need a free agent pickup next year, or go for a really number one wide receiver next year. So Jared Goff, he probably in a single quarterback league, you're not going to draft him unless it's just a late round, and maybe you have an Aaron Rodgers or Cam Newton, and you're just looking for a bye week fill-in. Jared Goff might be it's a flyer. In two quarterback leagues, you might draft him as a backup because more than likely in two quarterbacks leagues, there's not going to be any quarterbacks out there on the waiver wire. So Jared Goff will have a little bit more value. So moving on to obviously the number 2 pick in the draft, Carson Wentz, going to the Eagles. And I know I said that he's likely not going to see the field unless Sam Bradford, it comes back to the team. And lo and behold, Sam Bradford, he ended his very, very short holdout, and he's currently at voluntary workouts. So I'm really thinking that we're not going to see Carson Wentz. But saying that is based upon if Sam Bradford can stay healthy for an entire season, which he hasn't really proved that he's, this amazing, healthy guy that, he's had a ton of just ACL problems with a ton of shoulder problems. But I see Bradford, if he can stay healthy, he could succeed there, especially with the new coach, Doug Peterson. I think he's a better fit for that team. And for the same reasons that I think Sam Bradford could succeed, Carson Wentz is eventually going to succeed. In the long run, I think what's best for Carson Wentz is for him to sit on the bench for at least a year, if not 2, because it gives him time to develop so that when he comes in, he's actually ready. This is a guy who hasn't played a ton of football. He's really pretty new. You have players who have played quarterback for years by the time they get to the NFL. He only has a couple years experience, and he was going up against, Division II schools. But what I see if Carson Wentz, let's say Bradford does go down and he gets pushed into action, he does have some pretty decent talent around him that could, give him some mildly success in the NFL. You look at his receiving core that he has around him. He's got Jordan Matthews, who, is only a year removed from being a really good receiver. They picked up Ruben Randall, who I think is going to be a great compliment to Matthews, because he really gives. Matthews didn't have anybody to take away double teams last year, and I think Ruben Randall will definitely fill that up. Josh Huff is another guy. I think another year development. He's going to be a threat at some point. I've been saying the Nelson Aguilar all along, and I still got to think that they drafted him so high last year for some reason. So I got to think that they're keeping him around for something. But then they got a really good tight end in Zach Ertz. And those are all really decent options that any quarterback in the NFL could do a lot with. Now, the biggest issue that's going to be for Carson Wentz, if he has to come in this year, is the running back position and the lack of talent that they really have there. The two main guys, they have Ryan Matthews and Darren Sproles. And Ryan Matthews, he was okay last year. He wasn't great, but he's always injury prone. And Darren Sproles, he's 32. The guy, at some point, he's not a true running back. He's really a receiving threat out of the backfield. And those are your two main running backs. You got Kenyon Barner. I'm not sure what you're going to get from him, though. So there's not really a lot of help, and it's gonna have to come down to Carson Wentz throwing the ball, and that puts a lot of pressure on him. And with rookie quarterbacks, especially with somebody who doesn't have the experience that other rookie quarterbacks would have, it could wreck him. You see what happened to David Carr when he went first overall and was just expected to be the franchise quarterback of a new franchise. And you really hope that wouldn't happen to Carson Wentz. So more than likely, he's not going to see the field this year, hopefully. But what I would say in drafts is look to draft him as a dynasty quarterback, because I think in a year or two, if they get a decent running back to help out with pass protection and who can take some relief off of Carson Wentz could be a really good quarterback in a couple years. So maybe draft him in a dynasty league. And I know I talked about Christian Hackenberg last week, and I still have kind of a gut feeling about him. I think he has one of the easiest roads to being a starter. I'm just not sure how good he is. The only other rookie quarterback who I see having the possibility of having a good year is a guy that I don't really like, and that's Paxton Lynch, drafted by the Broncos in the first round. It's another gut feeling. I don't really like him, but he steps into probably the best situation for a rookie quarterback expected to start since really forever. I mean, the only other quarterback that I can look at in the recent past that stepped into a better situation is maybe Joe Flacco. And for Joe Flacco, it was more because he had a defense behind him that could carry the team. Paxton Lynch steps into a situation where they're coming off of a Super Bowl win. They didn't really lose any of their weapons, and their defense is still really solid. What the Broncos did do this offseason, though, they retooled their offensive line. They went out and got Russell Okung to really shore up the tackle position. They get C.J. Anderson and Ronnie Hillman back, who they may not be the best, but as a tandem, they definitely work right now. And they still have Demaryius Thomas, who he's on a good year and with a good quarterback. He is a top 5 wide receiver and should compete for the number 1 receiver position. And then they also have Emmanuel Sanders. Both of those guys are awesome. And they have a top-ranked defense that will keep pretty much any quarterback in games. Lynch is actually in kind of an opposite situation as Jared Goff, where Lynch is going to be expected to hand the ball off just like Goff, but where Goff has Gurley and no receivers, Lynch has 2 big question marks and a ton of receiving options. You know, C.J. Anderson and Ronnie Hillman, they're just, you're not sure what you're going to get out of them. They were both very underwhelming. They both got a chance to be the starting running backs, but neither of them were able to capture that job. So that would be my biggest concern for Paxton Lynch, is you're going to have to rely on him passing the ball. And you just don't know what you're going to get from a rookie. He doesn't look to me like an all-star quarterback. I don't know. It's gonna be tough for him, and I really wouldn't want to depend on him as a fan or in fantasy football. But you really can't deny the receiving threats that he has around him. I think he could see early success, but I'd really be worried if he lost any of his weapons. Like if Demaryius Thomas or Emmanuel Sanders went down, that's when it's really going to start hurting him. Paxton Lynch, you really shouldn't be looking to draft him unless you're looking for a flyer or if you're in a 2-quarterback league. It's really the only type of league where I see value for Paxton Lynch. Let's talk a little bit about the rookie running backs now that are on brand new teams and who you're likely going to be seeing in drafts this year. The first name off the board, obviously, Ezekiel Elliott. And I think similar to Paxton Lynch and the Broncos, Ezekiel Elliott steps into the best possible destination for a running back. Unlike Lynch, though, Elliott he's just going to eat up Elliott is just going to dominate as a running back. He was already looked at as a great running back prospect, and he now gets to go and run behind the best offensive line in football. You know, if the Cowboys can have, they had the 5th best yards per attempt in the NFL last year, and their top 4 rushers, Darren McFadden, who was essentially a retread, Joseph Randall, who's in jail right now, Robert Turbin, and Lucky Whitehead. Lucky Whitehead could run, if Lucky Whitehead could run 4.6 yards per attempt, I'm pretty sure I could run 4.6 yards per attempt. And that means Ezekiel Elliott is likely going to do pretty much the same. He's going to dominate. He's in a great situation. He's going to help out in the passing game. He's a great pass blocker, and his ability to catch out of the backfield is really going to help Tony Romo. It's going to take pressure off of Dez Bryant. And the only thing that you really need to look at and worry about would be the health of Tony Romo. But even if he wasn't there, Elliott is still going to be productive because Romo wasn't there for the majority of last season, and McFadden was able to rack up over 800 yards. Ezekiel Elliott he's a 1,000-yard rusher, and I'd say he gets at least at minimum 6 touchdowns. But I really see a high ceiling for Elliott. And he's going to go early in drafts. Right now on ESPN, they actually have him rated as the 4th best running back, which it's crazy to think of as for a rookie. You have the top 3 guys: Adrian Peterson, Le'Veon Bell, and Todd Gurley, and then it goes Ezekiel Elliott. He's above guys David Johnson, Devontae Freeman, Doug Martin, Lamar Miller, Mark Ingram. It's, Jamal Charles is number 12. I don't think it might be a little bit premature to rank him this high, but he definitely has that potential. And I really wouldn't be surprised at the end of the year if he is a top 5 back, because I definitely see him. I'm going to go out on a limb right now. He's going to be at least a top 10 running back at the end of this season because he's that good. The next running back who came off the board is probably one of the biggest question marks in the draft, and that is Derrick Henry from Alabama going to the Tennessee Titans. They traded up to get him. Now, if this was any other team that needed a running back position to fill, I wouldn't be opposed to that. But Derrick Henry, on a team that they traded up to get, he's on a team now with 4 other running backs that could be starters. The Titans alone, they have Bishop Sankey, who they drafted in 2014, the 2nd round. They have Antonio Andrews, who was their primary starter last year. He was an undrafted free agent in 2014. They have David Cobb, who they took in 2015 in the 5th round, who they thought had a lot of potential, and people were thinking that once he came back from injury, might really threaten for some starter time. And then they went out and they traded for DeMarco Murray. It doesn't make sense then why they went out and drafted Derrick Henry so high. He was definitely going to go somewhere in the 2nd or 3rd round, but you don't see that as a need for the Titans. And I can't say it's a bad spot because it's an up and coming team, but they're really trying to figure out who they are. And they have Marcus Mariota, who's coming out of an injury plagued first season, and they have a really young wide receiver core. He's gonna get a look since they traded up in the 2nd to get him, but I don't think you can depend on him. You can't depend on him to really give you points week in and week out. And when you're drafting, the biggest thing you want to look for is somebody who is going to consistently give you points. And I just don't know at this point if Derrick Henry is that guy. He's somebody that you're going to want to wait on in the draft. Somebody's going to jump up and grab him. But the guy in Tennessee that you really want right now is DeMarco Murray. Derrick Henry, at most, is a handcuff or a late-round flyer. He really doesn't have any business starting on any roster. Next running back taken is a little bit more interesting, and I think he has a lot of upside. and that's Kenyon Drake, who was drafted by the Dolphins. He's a scat back. He's tall. He can catch the ball in the backfield, and he's likely going to fill the role of a change of pace back. And with no Lamar Miller there, Jay Ajayi, who they drafted last year, looks to take over that primary running back role. But Kenyon Drake, he's fast, and he's going to be the benefit of Tannehill throwing it out of the backfield. And the biggest thing with him, though, is he's going to be very boomer bust. He has the kind of Darren Sproles possibilities of having 4 carries for 20 yards, but then having like 3 receptions for 80 yards and a touchdown, with one of those being like a 60-yard touchdown. You're not sure what you're going to get from him, and he may help out in the return game if you do get points for that in your league. But right now, as a rookie, I think his roof is a flex play or just depth on your team. But you want to keep a lookout on the Dolphins in case Ajayi or any of the other running backs on that team go down, because they'll have to rely a little bit more on Kenyon Drake to really pick it up. Because without Lamar Miller there really aren't better options behind him. Another one that I like, next running back, would be CJ Prosise, drafted by the Seahawks. He reminds me a lot of another Fighting Irish player who's on a team that's near and dear to me, the Lions, and that's Theo Riddick. He's a guy who he transitioned from a wide receiver to running back. He only played running back 1 year in college, but you saw the skill that he had and the possibilities. And what I like about him on Seattle is there really isn't a lot there. Beast mode, he's gone. He retired. So they got Thomas Rawls and Christian Michael and nothing else. I would actually put Prosise as the number 2 running back right there. And with Rawls coming off an injury, Prosise might actually get some really early time. I see the way the Seahawks using CJ is kind of like what they envisioned Percy Harvin being. When they got Percy Harvin, he was played by injuries almost the entire season, but you saw when he came in the playoffs the dynamic player that he was and the difference that he could make. And if Prosise can be that player, I think it's definitely worth adding him late in drafts. I see him as a sleeper, and you're going to want to look for him later in your drafts. He'll likely be there past the 9th or 10th round, unless people are really reaching for running backs at this point. But I like Prosise, especially if you draft Thomas Rawls, because if Rawls goes down for any certain amount of time, I don't trust Christian Michael to be the feature back, and I definitely would see CJ Prosise being the benefactor of that. Kenneth Dixon, a running back drafted by the Ravens. You look at him, it's not a sexy pick, but he's essentially almost become the number 2 running back by default. The number 1 guy there is Justin Forsett, and he's coming off of a broken arm last year. They got Buck Allen, but I don't think he really wowed the team. I think that's why they went out and drafted Kenneth Dixon. I'm not saying that you draft this guy, because there's likely a wide receiver out there that you could take a flyer on that might be a better pick late in drafts. But Kenneth Dixon is a name that you're going to want to remember for when, during the season in the waiver period, that, if Forsett or Buck Allen go down, that Kenneth Dixon is going to be the next guy in line. And it's a decent offense. You got Joe Flacco. You got good wide receivers there. It could be a good situation. And lastly, at running back is a guy that I talked about last week, Devontae Booker on the Broncos. As I was saying earlier when we were talking about Paxton Lynch, is that C.J. Anderson and Ronnie Hillman they're giant question marks. You don't know what you're going to get out of either of those guys. So you draft Devontae Booker, who had a pretty good college career in Utah. You got a good look at him when U of M played Utah and in the first game of the season last year. but it's likely gonna be a frustrating situation because behind Hillman and Anderson, that's the perfect definition of running back by committee because they essentially split everything. But I think if Booker could just kind of edge past them in training camp, going through, maybe showing something different, provide some solid pass protection, because whoever the quarterback is, whether it's Paxton Lynch or Mark Sanchez or quarterback to be named, I think then Booker shoots up the boards and he could be interesting. But as of now, he's buried behind C.J. Anderson and Ronnie Hillman, and I would only draft him really late. But more than likely, you're going to want to look at him on waivers, and he's going to start the season there. But we're going to take a break right now. When we come back, we're going to look at the wide receivers, and then we'll wrap the show up. But you're listening to the Fantasy Nerds on the Detroit Sports Podcast Network, brought to you by the Fan Up Network. The Fantasy Nerd Show is sponsored by the Fan Up Network. They've developed the ultimate fantasy football app. It's a one-stop shop for everything you need. You can track teams and scores across multiple platforms, get latest injury and player news, and access to expert advice. See the hot trends with waiver pickups and drops. It has everything you need to manage all your fantasy football teams. Android users can get the app in the Play Store, and an iPhone version is coming soon. Go to fanupnetwork.com to learn more and follow them on Twitter at fanupnetwork. Welcome back to the Fantasy Nerd Show on the Detroit Sports Podcast Network, brought to you by the Fan Up Network. We just covered quarterbacks and running backs, and now we're going to dive into rookie wide receivers. So the first one off the board, and probably the biggest name, was Corey Coleman, drafted by the Browns. And I really like what he brings to the table, but he's going to be completely dependent on who's throwing him the ball. So right now, they got RG3, and I'm not sure how much of a fan you are of him or not, but he hasn't done much. He had his really good rookie season in Washington, and then he's been plagued by that injury ever since, and he's never just really returned to what people thought he was going to. I mean, they spent so much to get Robert Griffin III, and he didn't work out. So if RG3 can get back to that rookie form, I think that it would be the best case scenario for Corey Coleman. But I'm not going to hold my breath for them. So they have RG3, and then they still have Josh McCown. Corey Coleman is definitely worth grabbing, but you have to be cautious because he's the main option there. They have the tight end Gary Barnidge, and they have the running back Duke Johnson. But after that, they drafted so many wide receivers this year. Corey Coleman, though, is going to be the lead guy, and unless Josh Gordon miraculously makes a comeback in the NFL, Corey Coleman is going to be the guy there. The potential is all there, but right now I don't see him as more than a low-end wide receiver 3. He's going to give you hit or miss stuff. You're probably drafting him in the mid to late rounds. Will Fuller and Braxton Miller, 2 wide receivers taken by the Texans. I love both of these guys. I like one a little bit more, and I'll tell you who. But DeAndre Hopkins last year had the 3rd most targets in the NFL, and he really did. He had nobody behind him. He had Nate Washington. So he started out really hot, but teams really started double covering him after he had a breakout week in week 6 where he had, I think, 10 receptions and 2 touchdowns. And after that game, though, he only had 8 or more catches in 2 of his last 10 games. So drafting Will Fuller and Braxton Miller immediately is going to force other teams to respect the pass, and they're not just going to be able to double cover DeAndre Hopkins. And if they do, they're going to have to deal with Will Fuller, who is he's a speedster, and he's going to have some long touchdowns this year. You can guarantee that. And then also dealing with Miller, who I think is more. I don't see him as a pure wide receiver. I see him as more of as a weapon. You had Dexter McCluster, when he came out, he was kind of perceived as a weapon because he wasn't really a running back, but he wasn't really a wide receiver. I think Braxton Miller is a little bit more wide receiver than him, but you're going to see the Texans and Bill O'Brien line him up really everywhere on the offense. You're going to see him line up on the slot. You're going to see him line up outside. I think you may even see him line up in the backfield as a running back. Because he's just that versatile. At Ohio State, you saw the highlights from last year, where essentially he pressed the B button and a spin move, and it's amazing. And I think it's going to be good for all the wide receivers because it's going to take pressure out DeAndre Hopkins. He's still going to get his. He's still the number one. But Will Fuller and Braxton Miller they both had the home run threat potential. And more than likely in fantasy, it's going to be boom or bust every week. You're not really sure who's going to, at this point, you're not sure who is going to step up and be that number 2 guy. So Will Fuller, he likely right now tops out as a wide receiver 3 with the potential to kind of move up as maybe a wide receiver 2, just because I think he's more of a wide receiver than what Braxton Miller is. And Miller would be just slightly under Fuller, but I really do like him. I think he'll be interesting to watch just for what he can bring to the team. Josh Doctson, drafted by the Redskins. There's a slew of wide receivers drafted in the late part of the first round. The thing I don't like about Josh Doctson is that he comes into a crowded wide receiver core. You have Pierre Garçon there, Deshaun Jackson, Jamison Crowder, and more than likely the number 1 option in Washington is tight end Jordan Reed. He had a breakout year. He has dealt with injuries, but he's the number 1 option there for Kirk Cousins. But the Redskins likely didn't spend a first rounder on Doctson for nothing. I think he has similar potential as Corey Coleman, and he does have a better quarterback throwing to him right now. But you're really going to have to watch the situation in Washington because there's the possibility that they could deal Pierre Garçon or Deshaun Jackson, but he may have a tough time this year really fighting for fantasy points. More than likely what will happen is either Garçon or Deshaun Jackson will be let go at the end of the year, and this is what they drafted Doctson for, is to be that replacement. More than likely you see D-Jax go because there's comparisons between Josh Doctson and Deshaun Jackson. So what I would do for him is draft him either really low, or if you're in a dynasty league, he definitely has a lot of value then. He's going to be a pretty decent wide receiver if he gets enough reps. The next biggest wide receiver out there, and I know a lot of Lion fans were worried that we might take this guy, is Laquan Treadwell, drafted by the Vikings. And this is another receiver who steps into a crowded wide receiver core, but the difference here is Treadwell is already the number 2 guy on that list. Stephon Diggs came in last year and proved that he is the number 1 guy. And then you have Kyle Rudolph, who's a pretty solid tight end. I think you've seen the ceiling from him. I'm not sure how much better he's going to get, but he at least proved that he's a reliable target. But after that, you got Charles Johnson, Cordero Patterson, and Jairus Wright, who more than likely one or more of those guys are going to be on the outside looking in from the team. They may not even make the team. So Treadwell is already going to be the number 2 guy on the Vikings. But the problems you're going to run into, this offense is still going to roll through Adrian Peterson, just like the Rams with Gurley. The main game plan is going to be hand off the ball Adrian Peterson to the left, to the right, to the center, and doing everything they can to get him yards. And the quarterback, Teddy Bridgewater, I know he still has some potential in him, but he just hasn't taken that next step yet. I know we saw last year when they brought in Mike Wallace, they were hoping that he was going to take that next step last year. So unless we really see Bridgewater improve vastly, it's gonna be tough sledding for Treadwell this year. But he's definitely going to be worthy of a late pick as depth for wide receiver, because as I said in the podcast last week, it's coming down to a wide receiver league, and when you're going into drafts and you're looking for depth, you want to get wide receivers, because at some point you're going to hit on one of these wide receivers, and then when you have all the abundance of these talents, you can use that as trade bait to upgrade where you didn't get in the draft. Sterling Shepard, drafted by the Giants, he's going to be an interesting case. He's drafted in the second round, and here's a list of who the Giants wide receivers last year were. You had Odell Beckham Jr., and he's undeniably the top wide receiver there. There's no doubt he's a top 3 wide receiver in the league right now. After him, Ruben Randle, he's gone. He's on the Eagles now. You have Victor Cruz, who he struggled to get on the field at all last season, and who knows if he's going to come back and be able to do the same things that he used to do, and what we knew and loved when he's doing his salsa dance. And then Dwayne Harris. So Sterling Shepard comes into a pretty decent situation because they're a passing team. Eli Manning throws a ton out of 3 wide receiver sets. So even if you have Odell Beckham and either Victor Cruz or Dwayne Harris, Sterling Shepard is going to be that third guy in there. And we've seen, like with the Packers, you spread out the ball and you make good things happen. And Eli Manning does a similar thing. They're going to pass a lot, and I think Sterling Shepard is going to be the benefit of where Ruben Randle left off last year. I think he's a big target. Eli Manning will soon come to rely on what Shepard can provide to the team. I talked last week about Michael Thomas, drafted by the Saints. I think it's a really, really good fit for that team. Even though Drew Brees is another year older, last year he still flirted pretty close to 5,000 yards and had 32 touchdowns. The main receivers there, Brandon Cooks, Willie Snead, those are both smaller guys. And with Thomas's size, I think he essentially replaces what Marcus Colston had. And I think Michael Thomas will be a great red zone threat. Ben Watson kind of had a resurgence last year, but how long is he going to be able to go? I think Michael Thomas, he's going to be the benefactor. They've been trying to replace Jimmy Graham ever since he left. And Drew Brees, he spreads the ball around. He's just like Tom Brady, just like Aaron Rodgers. He gets everybody involved. And that's going to be one of the downsides of trying to pick Michael Thomas and trying to put him in, because you're going to have to play the game. Which Saint wide receiver will have a big day today? The joke was always Devery Henderson's going to have a breakout season, or Robert Meacham, and all those guys just hung around forever, and you never knew when they were going to have a good game. You knew that at some point in the season they were going to do good, but it's literally a crapshoot deciding who's gonna do it this week and who's gonna make it. I'd look to draft Michael Thomas late in your drafts. He's no more right now than depth. Maybe a flex play on a bye week. But definitely keep an eye if he does get past the draft, and look for him on waivers if you have some sort of injury and need to pick up a wide receiver, because at some point in the season he's going to make it work. Tyler Boyd, drafted by the Bengals, he comes to a team that definitely needs wide receiver help. Yes, they have AJ Green, and yes, they have Tyler Eifert, both a great wide receiver, great tight end combo. But Andy Dalton, there's no Marvin Jones there. There's no Mohamed Sanu. But it's going to be really wide open for people to get receptions there. Giovanni Bernard and Jeremy Hill, it was kind of looked at that they were going to be the focus of the team last year. But both of them struggled. And you saw what Andy Dalton was able to do last year. So Tyler Boyd coming in here, I think he's just going to be the benefit of the passing offense on Cincinnati. You probably shouldn't draft him though, because he's still going to be a really, really low option. He's not going to be a great guy every week. But just like the rest of these guys, you're going to want to watch on waivers. And the last guy that I want to tell you about, not a wide receiver, but a tight end, Hunter Henry, drafted by the Chargers. He's essentially become the heir apparent behind Antonio Gates, and the Chargers will eventually rely on him to replace him whenever Gates decides to retire. We all know Antonio Gates, he's not the pillar of health that you'd want him to be. So you may see Henry come in this year. We saw last year with Ladarius Green, he was the benefactor of Antonio Gates being hurt, and he was suspended a little bit too. And I think even still, Phillip Rivers, he loves tight ends. So they're going to get Henry. They spend a draft pick on him. They're going to get Henry involved. He doesn't, unfortunately, have any draft value right now. But that's definitely someone you want to put on your watch list when you get into the season, especially if you do have Antonio Gates. Anybody who has him really should have an eye on who's his backup, because at any point, maybe Gates tweaks something in his hammy, maybe he rolls his ankle, and then you're going to need to have that backup just in case. To wrap up the rookie talk, I posted a poll on Twitter asking you, the fans, who will be the most productive NFL offensive rookie this year. I gave you the options Ezekiel Elliott, Jared Goff, Corey Coleman, or other. And you spoke, it was a resounding 67% for Ezekiel Elliott. The next closest was 20% for other. Jared Goff getting 6%, Corey Coleman getting 7%. I completely agree with all of you. I think Ezekiel Elliott is hands down the favorite right now to be the most productive offensive rookie. But Jared Goff, I think just because he's a quarterback, he's going to get a lot of looks. And if he has remotely any success in Ezekiel Elliott, maybe he has some injury issues. But more than likely, Zeke Elliott, he's going to be your offensive rookie of the year next year. And he's going to be a staple in fantasy football for years to come. To wrap up the show, I'm going to start giving you, the listeners, tips on how you can get prepared for draft. And the first tip that I want to give to all of you, it's a little early, but again, it's never too early to start preparing and looking at all the information you can. But once you get closer to draft and you're ready to go, you got your magazine or you got your computer ready, you want to make sure that you have all the material that you need and that you've looked it all over before you get to draft, whether it's a live draft or whether it's an online draft. Because unless you're a complete fantasy expert, and even then, if you're still then, or I guess if you want to fly by the seat of your pants, I've done that a couple times where I just kind of go in and go with my gut. It didn't really work as well as I hoped, but you want to be prepared. If you have magazines, you want to dog ear some of the pages. You want to know where the cheat sheet is, so you can look at just a big list of all the quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, and when you're going through the individual position pages, maybe highlight some guys that you want to target, because when you go into a draft, you can always go with the best player available, but when you're looking at, if you are looking specifically for a certain position, say you want to get a wide receiver, if you go through and you see a player that you want, let's say it's a guy who's a little bit lower that you really want to get, but it's a little too early to draft him, you'll know when you want to take him. If you want to make that jump to really get the guy that you want, or maybe you can realize that you can hold off on him. It makes a big difference in drafts. And if you do have a computer program helping you out, there are the systems where essentially you can just plug in a name and it gives you what is best for your team. You want to make sure you know how to use it, definitely. In the league that I've been in for as long as I can remember, we have a couple guys who use the same system, and we actually had an incident where one guy went through the entire draft with the previous year's programs. So he didn't end up winning. He didn't have a horrible draft, But you don't want to have that mistake. You want to give yourself the best chance possible to maximize your winning in fantasy football, because as much as it's a game, you want to have fun. The most fun you can have is winning. But probably the biggest thing you can do to prepare, and where you can find a lot of material, is you always want to be looking at the websites. I really like ESPN. You can go to CBS as well. They have all the latest updates. You can get injury updates, maybe how training camp is going, how the battles are going. And they even have a section where you can print out any cheat sheet that you could ever imagine, from just a regular draft to IDP drafts to auction drafts to everything. And on top of that, you also want to have a bye week sheet, because if you keep going through drafting, you don't want to be caught drafting 3 wide receivers with the same bye week, because then you're pretty much screwed, and you're going to have to drop somebody at some point or try to make a trade. But that'll do it for this episode of the Fantasy Nerds. I really appreciate you guys listening. You can follow me on Twitter at Jarvi the King. Check out the Detroit Sports Podcast Twitter page at Detroit Podcast. And also follow our sponsor, the Fan Up Network. Follow them on Twitter at Fan Up Network. You can also go to the website fanupnetwork.com. That's it for me. I'm Jason Jarvi. Until next week, stay nerdy.